I want to talk today about this idea of fasting, but I think we need to build a little bit of perspective first. And the place I'd like to start is understanding the difference between life expectancy and healthy life expectancy. You know, people talk a lot about life expectancy, which is, the average age a person born today is likely to live. But what we probably should be talking about more of is healthy life expectancy. How long a person is going to live fully functional, able to taking care of themselves, enjoying their lives, rather than finding yourselves unable to talk or move lying in a nursing home bed somewhere. There's a big difference between healthy life expectancy and life expectancy. And how long a person lives is largely determined, it turns out, by genetics and luck. But how well people live in the time they have is largely determined by diet and lifestyle choices. There have been 109 billion modern humans, more or less, born on this planet. There are about 7.7 billion of us alive today, but there's only been well-documented evidence of 5 individuals living past 117. And even one of those is in question because they may have adopted the identity of their grandfather to avoid conscription into the military. So the idea that you're going to live beyond 117 currently is unlikely. The odds are approximately 1 in 20 billion. Odds would be better that you would live less than that. What that should bring our attention to is the fact that given that we have a limited amount of time left to live, the important focus is going to be how can we ensure that in those years that we have, we can be fully functional. In 1900, for example, life expectancy was 47. Today it's 78.6 and dropping. Actually, for the first time in recent years, life expectancy has actually been reducing in industrialized countries rather than the previous history of expansion. And we can talk about that later. But the reality is that there's 31 years more life expectancy today than in 1900. But adults live a little longer than they did in 1900. An adult 65 years old in 1900 could expect to live 12 years. Additionally, today it's about 19. So that's only a 7-year increase. And an 85-year-old, only about a 2-year increase. So the question is, if adults are only living a little longer, where did this 24-year difference go? And of course, the answer is that it's explained by a reduction in infant mortality. Instead of having 176 babies per 1,000 dying, now it's about 6 or 7 per 1,000 dying, which means children that in increasing numbers reach adulthood. And for every child that doesn't die in infancy, it adds 76 years to the average. It shifts the curve to the right. And in fact, of the 31-year increase in life expectancy, 24 years of it was due entirely to a reduction in infant and childhood mortality, not because adults are living longer. That additional difference is 7 years, and that's for all influences combined. So if you're thinking that the miracles of modern medicine are going to ensure you a long and productive life, you may be disappointed. In the United States, we spend more money on healthcare than any place else on the planet per capita. 2.5 times more than folks in the European Union. You would assume that if money correlated with health, that we should be the healthiest people on the planet, that both our life expectancy and our healthy life expectancy should be stellar, but they're not. The reality is our life expectancy lags those people that spend dramatically less on money, and our healthy life expectancy is also less, as you can see from this chart. As a reminder, life expectancy is how long an individual born today can live. Healthy life expectancies of that time, how much is going to be healthful and productive. Life expectancy of 78, healthy life expectancy is only 69. People spend 9.4 years in debility on average and 17 years in poor health. And it's that reduction in debility and poor health that we have the most likelihood of being able to influence. What we do, at least in the United States, is we spend most of our money treating the leading causes of death, heart disease, cancer, and stroke, instead of focusing on the actual causes of death, the reason people get heart disease, cancer, and stroke, which is smoking, drinking alcohol, and eating an animal-rich diet full of complex carbohydrates, sugars, oils, and excess salt. If we were to spend more of our resources, our effort, our time, and our money on the actual causes of death, I predict that we would have a substantial reduction in the leading causes of death and at substantially more efficient cost. So if we look at the things that actually kill us, number one, of course, is tobacco. Tobacco is a fabulously efficient way of dying prematurely because it affects virtually every organ system in the body. When you think about tobacco, the first disease that comes to most people's minds is cancer of the lung. However, 80% of smokers never actually get lung cancer. Some people have suggested, well, maybe smoking is protecting people from getting lung cancer. And in a way, that's true because smoking is so effective at causing heart disease and killing people from heart attacks and strokes that they don't live long enough to grow their lung cancers. And so in a bizarre way, smoking's deadliness prevents many of its participants from getting the disease most commonly associated with it. High blood pressure, a little bit less efficient than tobacco, is causing premature death, and it mostly contributes to heart attacks and strokes. Alcohol consumption, you'll notice, is also a major cause of what's actually killing people. And yet today, if you look at the media, you would think that alcohol is some kind of health food. They tell you if you don't drink, you should start because alcohol thins the blood or is a rich source of resveratrol, a powerful antioxidant. And while it's true, alcohol does thin the blood, much like aspirin. So for people on high animal food diets at risk for clotting strokes, there's a slight reduction in the risk of clotting stroke. There's not an actual reduction in death because although you reduce the risk of clotting stroke, you increase the risk of bleeding or hemorrhagic stroke. I guess if your goal is to die from a hemorrhagic stroke rather than a clotting stroke, alcohol might have a legitimate role. Cholesterol levels are a marker for how much animal food you eat. The more animal food you eat in general, the higher your risk of dying. Overweight is not a healthful state, and obesity, in fact, is a major contributing cause of all-cause mortality. Low fruit and vegetable intakes, just not eating enough fruits and vegetables, is a major contributing cause of death, as is physical inactivity, illicit drugs, and unsafe sexual behaviors. So those are the things that are actually killing people. Those are the things that we need to put our effort into dealing with if our goal is to live a longer and healthier life. The reality is, though, that we now have an epidemic of metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome is a condition or a syndrome where people have excess weight, as demonstrated by their increased waist circumference, elevated blood lipid levels, elevated blood pressure, or elevated blood glucose. And for people that have three or more of the variables on this chart, they have what is called metabolic syndrome. And metabolic syndrome is unquestionably associated with everything from liver and colorectal cancer to gout and diabetes to stroke, congestive heart failure, myocardial infarction, coronary artery disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and many other diseases. In fact, even dying from infectious diseases, including COVID-19, is influenced by metabolic syndrome. So figuring out a way to effectively deal with this epidemic disease is, in fact, going to be one of the most important issues at preventing all-cause morbidity and mortality from these conditions.